Because a lot of the songs were not done at the breakneck speed that, say, Led Zeppelin favoured, you'd have to have a rock-solid basis to carry the song. Iommi knew that he had it, he used it, and Ozzy did the rest.
I remember seeing Sabbath when I was a youngster with Ozzy, and that was classic. You know, it's an experience to be revered, if not musically, just for the experience of watching some loony jump about on stage.
There's no one better on stage than Ozzy. I mean, he's an absolute monster when it comes to that.
On stage, he's a superb entertainer, incredible, enthusiastic.
And I think, conversely, he brought the best out of Tony Iommi. So as a frontman, I don't think Iommi was naturally that much of a sort of extrovert. But the fact he was on stage with Ozzy, he could rely on Ozzy to really stir the audience up, pump them up, and sort of kind of keep the drama up.
Ozzy Osborn is a completely off-the-wall character, so he brings that to his singing.
Not technically the greatest singer in the world, but a man who used his voice to suit what his band were doing perfectly.
Sometimes I think it's one of the most tuneful and delightful voices in the world. Other times I think he's just pissing around.
And obviously mad as a bag of spanners.
As all people are in bands, you always get the, jokers and stuff, and Ozzy was like sort of the joke, while we were putting stuff together, he'd be outside playing football, or walking around the block or something.
I sincerely believe that half the time he was so pissed he didn't know what he was doing anyway. But he was always entertaining.
Ozzy gave the band its visual identity, its vocal identity certainly, and whether people love him or hate him as a singer, he certainly drew the band out and brought them to fame and fortune. Of that I have no doubt whatsoever.
The original lineup of Black Sabbath hit a peak with Paranoid and Master of Reality, two albums that really gave their musical manifesto in a very, very succinct form. By the time they got on to Volume 4, they'd jettisoned the original producer Roger Bain, and with it they'd taken on extra light and shade using Rick Wakeman, the keyboard player of Yes, to give them a different tone colour.
The danger would be that after 2 or 3 very successful records, then they know that what they have to do is to pretty much continue with that style, and the audience doesn't really want them to divert too much from that.
Black Sabbath was done in 2 days, and Paranoid was 5 days to a week. It took us to do that, finish it. But Massive Reality was quite a different thing. That took a lot longer. That's when we started getting into long time for us. It was going into weeks, and we thought, oh God, this is taking a bit long. I think any past product you listen to, you always go, oh dear, we could have done this and we could have done that. But for the time, no, I think it was all right. And Volume 4, the same. That was good for us at the time we'd done Volume 4, because it was the first time I think we'd actually recorded in America. And we went over to LA, and it was great. It was great times. It was a whole new thing to be recording in sort of record plant, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. It was good.
This is a time when you know, an album didn't contain sort of 15 tracks. Some of Sabbath albums, you know, had 8 tracks, 4 tracks aside, so they weren't having to overdo it with the writing, which I think meant that what they did put on record stands up head and shoulders against what a lot of today's bands manage to put on, because of course they have to put on far more songs. So that's one reason why the early Sabbath legacy still holds up to this day, and why you can look at any of their first 5 albums and there's going to be 4 or 5 tracks on there that you instantly recognisable as being some of the finest sort of songs from the genre.
The early Sabbath albums worked very, very well, right up to Sabotage.
We were getting to use involved keyboards a bit more, and we thought, well, we don't want to keep playing, and we're not good enough to keep playing these things. So we brought a keyboard player in when we wrote Technical Ecstasy.
Where to go and where to see, it's always been that way, and it can never be. It's alright. It's alright.
I must admit, I quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed that album, although I think I was a bit too self-indulgent for me. I think I got a bit too over the top with it, because I got more into the production side then, and I was fiddling about. But yeah, I think it was probably slightly apart from some of the other albums we've done.
They did 2 albums after Sabotage, and you could clearly see they were a band falling apart.
The last 2 records that they recorded with Ozzy weren't great by a long shot.
Some of them wound up on drugs and all the rest of it. And, you know, Ozzy went, whichever way he went, and he was gone in a lot of ways for quite some years, I think.
It just wasn't working, things just wasn't happening. We ended up rehearsing for 11 months and nothing was coming up. So we'd come up with plenty of riffs and stuff, but there was no enthusiasm. So it just had to come to an end, and we had to have a talk, so it's not going to happen. And it was the time when Ozzy went then. I think at that time he was going through a lot of problems himself, and we needed to sort of get away from each other, and we needed to do our own thing, I think. Or he certainly needed to do his own thing.
When Ozzy left Black Sabbath, I think for a lot of people it was almost unthinkable that they could carry on.
Ozzy Osborn, of course, was quite literally irreplaceable. You just couldn't find somebody to fill his shoes.
Singers are the hardest people to replace, and you couldn't get a complete replacement for Ozzy because Ozzy is so unique.
Now, Ronnie James Dio, perhaps on paper, wouldn't have appeared like the ideal choice to front Black Sabbath. He'd been sacked from Rainbow and was toying around with some other musical things and didn't really know what he was doing, and they got a call and they hooked up. Like I said, on paper, it would have looked very odd, and certainly because of Ozzy's strong image and the way that image was linked to Black Sabbath, the band. But you only have to listen to Heaven and Hell to know that this is a marriage made in heaven.
It worked great. I mean, straight away it was like life into the band again by just bringing somebody new in, and the sparkle was there again, and it was really exciting. Everybody was like really ready to go again by whom somebody put something into it. So.
I don't think that there was a better choice of singer. I don't think anybody else could have gone in and pulled off walking into Ozzy's shoes as well and as creatively and with such a bombastic approach as Ronnie Dio did.
Some of the things we had already written before Ronnie came, so his involvement was good really, because he came up with a few other ideas to add to the songs.
I think it was a risk for them to bring someone in who sounded like he did, because he wasn't the Ozzy replacement. He was clearly going to make the band a very, very different band.
Of course, the way he'd sing, he's a totally different singer to Ozzy, so the way he'd approach things was a lot more operatic, if you like, so it helped a lot for us.
He was a good choice, but he wasn't Ozzy Osborn, never really wanted to be. He was Ronnie James Dio, and a phenomenally good singer at that.
He did 2 albums with Sabbath, and I think probably the first one, Heaven and Hell, was a high point, perhaps the highest point since Master of Reality.
I think Heaven and Hell is the best Black Sabbath album. I think it sounds the best. I think the songs are absolutely amazing.
Ronnie James Dio is one of the greatest rock singers of all time. And almost anything he lends his voice to has a very classy sort of sound to it.
He clearly had a lot of influence in the band, in the writing, the sound. He transformed Black Sabbath, and I think he transformed it from a dying band into quite a vibrant musical entity.
Captains at the helm sail across the sea of light, again and again, again and again, and again. Neon nights, neon nights, neon nights.
the first kind of taster many people would have got for Heaven and Hell. Neon Nights was the first single.
As an introduction to the band, I thought it was fantastic because I mean it's so dramatic and it moves along at a great rate of knots.
Neon Nights was an outstanding track from the first Dio album with Sabbath. Obviously, as an opening track, you have to grab the listener's attention. And I think it did that.
It comes rumbling out of the speakers in a barrage of bass and thrashing guitar in a way that Children of the Grave had done when it hit its peak as a song.
Clearly you can hear Dio's influence on this song. He really goes for it and does the track real justice.
It was funny that around the early 80s, or late 70s, early 80s, certainly in Britain and probably most other parts of the world, rock music, or quite heavy rock music, was quite commercial.
I guess it's as commercial as Sabbath get. I don't know what chart placing it got to. I think it did fairly well.
You would get it played in discos and on the radio and on TV. It was quite acceptable for what we would call now like a heavy metal band to be in the charts and to be on top of the pops and whatever.
They went from being more of a sort of straight ahead metal band to they developed this more kind of like more of a heavy rock sound, very melodic, still very heavy as well, over the whole album. But Neon Nights is a good example that, you know, they were heavy but very melodic, and evidently it was going to work, and it worked very, very well for them.
Die Young was a very clever combination of the best of Rainbow and the best of Sabbath.
Die Young was a good song, one of the better ones from the Heaven and Hell album, and I think it worked because it was vibrant, it was fast, powerful, and fantastic vocals from Ronnie James Dio.
It's very difficult to pinpoint what would be the greatest song of that era, but that's got to be in there definitely, Die Young. Fantastic song.
Layered in a few Queen-like harmonies as well, which certainly did it no harm with Queen sailing high over the punk wave that had engulfed so many of the other groups of that era.
Die young, gonna die young. Someone stopped the
Musically, it's probably the strongest Black Sabbath album ever. Now, I mean, you know, these arguments raised, Ozzy's the only singer Black Sabbath. Well, Ozzy was a great singer for Black Sabbath, but so was Ronnie James Dio, certainly on the Heaven and Hell album. I mean, musically, Sabbath, the whole sort of sound had changed. They'd sounded tired, a tired band on the two albums that preceded Heaven and Hell. But Heaven and Hell comes out at the height of resurgence of interest